Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and it is time to get back to the full review of the Sennheiser HD660S2 full-size, open-back, dynamic driver headphone that comes in at $600 US. This was a kind loan from a friend of the channel who bought it brand new from Audio 46 and then had it shipped here. So I got to experience this headphone from a production unit, brand new in the box experience. Okay, so thank you to that friend of the channel. Sennheiser has had no contact with me, so they have made no attempt to influence my opinion on this piece one way or the other. I did a first impressions video of this headphone, which I will link to down in the description below. But it is time to dive into the full review and for me to give the full report on my experience with the Sennheiser HD660S2. So we will do that right after shameless self-promotion. Hey, thanks for watching this video. Please remember to hit that like button, and if you haven't, please subscribe. Also, I have a Patreon set up so that you can help support me on a monthly basis, and I've set up a PayPal donation so that you can help me out in that way too if a monthly subscription does not make sense for you. Links for all of that, including the benefits, in the description below. Please check those out. All right, on with the show. Does the S2 stand for Strike 2? As I was thinking about this review and like how to frame it and how to couch it and all of that, like I keep coming back to, like, there seems to be a consensus in the reviewing community that this piece is fairly strong. It's a reasonably good performer. It's just overpriced. Now, I normally try to avoid reviews of other reviews of pieces that I know that I either have in for review or will be getting in soon, because I just try as best I can to just form my own opinion of it, completely independent, if possible, from the rest of the audio community. That, if possible, caveat really applies to a piece like this, because the name Sennheiser is on here, and it's in the HD600 line. Sennheiser as a brand has reached legendary status in our hobby, as has their HD600 series of headphones, and deservedly so. So a new entry into, with that name and with that product categorization, is going to drum up a lot of interest. Reviews are going to flood out there like it's unavoidable. And so the reason that I say, does S2 stand for Strike 2, is because the consensus on the HD660S revision 1, the S1 if you will, was that it was a solid headphone, but it was overpriced. The S2 comes along, they change a couple of things, and it seems that the reviewer consensus out there is kind of like, it's a solid headphone, but it's overpriced. And so that's kind of like where I'm thinking, using the baseball analogy, S1, S2. Strike 1, strike 2, I don't know. I do have an opinion on that, but we'll come back to that later on in the video here. And so then, like, me saying all of this here at the beginning, a number of you are probably thinking something like, uh-oh, Wave Theory is about ready to trash this thing. Is this going to be a negative review? You know what? I will just let you decide at the end whether or not this was a negative review. And please comment down below as to whether or not you thought this ended up ultimately being a positive or a negative review. So let's dive into my more complete and coherent, hopefully, thoughts on the 660S2. All right, so again, what is it? It is a $600 US piece, open back, full size, dynamic driver headphone. It has the build of the HD600 series. Yes, that primarily means that it's made out of plastic where it could be metal. About the only metal thing in there is the headband part right here. Okay, and that gives it a fair amount of clamp, so like that Sennheiser head and a vice grip clamp starts there. I do recommend, stretching these out a bit. It does wear in over time and help with the comfort there. Once you get it worn in, they become pretty comfortable with this design. Same thing, pads are initially a little stiff, but they do wear in and become increasingly comfortable over time too. Eventually with Sennheisers, they become a little too soft and you have to replace them and do that part over again. So that's like the one like build weakness, if you will, of the Sennheiser 600 series. But the build quality and all of that is good. You can tell it is distinctively Sennheiser 600 series. Like, here's my HD6XX, okay? And you can tell very much so that like they are sibling units with very similar builds and all of that sort of thing, okay? I do like that Sennheiser gave this one the black colorway with the either copper or bronze color accents here. I think that looks sharp, so that was a good design decision on their part, in my opinion. Okay, so that's the headphone in a nutshell there, at least from the build. An interesting design decision that they made, moving from the 660S1 to the 660S2, is to go back to a 300 ohm impedance. The 660S1 was a 150 ohm headphone. The S2 here returns to the HD600 series norm of being a 300 ohm impedance driver. Okay, and that comes along with a 104 dB per 1 volt input sensitivity. So the 300 ohms means you're going to need a fair amount of voltage in particular to drive this. The 104 dB per volt sensitivity, though, means that it's really not an overly arduous load. Like, once your piece can handle, your amp can handle the 300 ohms and the voltage swings that come along with that, okay, then the sensitivity there will mean that you don't really have to crank up the volume or your potentiometer to push these and get them really loud and all of that. So I would say medium difficulty in driving. You do have to take a little bit of care in amp pairings, but they are not super picky once the amp can handle 300 ohm loads. Okay, now, other things that about the build here, you still get the standard Sennheiser proprietary 2-pin input on the cabling. It comes with 2 stock cables. Both of them, of course, come with these Sennheiser plugs on the headphone end. They are both, you know, not quite 2 meters long, okay? I think 1.8 meter is like the length there. Okay, and so this one is a balanced that has the 4.4 millimeter Pentacon connector on the amp end. And then the other one, same length, same build, other than it is the 6.35 millimeter or 1/4 inch single-ended connection on the amp end. And then they send this single-ended adapter, which is 1/4 inch there, and 3.5 millimeter or 1/8 inch here on the amp end. The only complaint I have about this is if you're going to go ahead and throw in an adapter in like this, why not also give us a Pentacon to 4-pin XLR balanced adapter too? I would have appreciated that. That would have been a nice touch. And that is also because these are among the better stock cables that I have seen from a lot of headphone makers. It does have just a slight bit of memory to it. This is the one that I used more. Okay, and you can see it's already starting to straighten out a bit compared to the 1/4 inch one. Like this one is just a little bit more bent up, all of that. But again, I used it less, so it didn't have a chance to relax as much as the balanced one did. Okay, but they're pretty decent as far as stock cables go. So the inclusion of a balanced was nice. You can really just get by with buying a Pentacon to XLR adapter if on the balanced cable if you need to plug it into a balanced amp that only has the 4-pin XLR output. Okay. Let's get into the sound then, eh? Test gear. Plentiful. DACs that would have been used at some point. Shit, Modi Multibit 2. Cord Hugo 2. Berkeley Alpha Series 2. Musician Draco, I'm pretty sure was in there somewhere. SMSL VMV D1SE. Aries 12th Anniversary Edition from Denafrips. Okay, I think you get the picture. Plenty. Amplifiers at some point. My Canon HA1A Mark II tube amp. Urzatich Perfitus amp. Vioelectric HPA V281. Direct output from the Cord Hugo 2. and the i5 Pro iCan Signature Edition. Okay, so all of those at one point or another would have driven these. My first impressions video, if you recall, was based on listening impressions basically right out of the box with no break-in. Before I did the review and reported on all of the sound stuff that you were about to hear, I did let these break in a couple different times. About 24 to 25-ish hours before I did some serious listening. Wasn't quite satisfied yet. A friend of the channel sent me an email and was like, hey, I found that after about 50 hours, they really wake up, 50 hours of break-in. So I broke these in for another, 24, 25-ish hours. It actually ended up being close to 30 hours just to make sure that I got beyond that 50. And then so the rest of the comments that you are about to hear are after that break-in. The break-in did help, but was not like huge and immensely improving in its sound. All right, so yeah, let's talk about that sound. What have I found here sonically? Sennheiser claims, and I think with a fair amount of accuracy, that the presentation here is warmer and with a more sub-bass presence than the 660S1. That is correct, both by ear. As I reviewed the S1 a while ago, before I was ever on YouTube doing videos. I did a written review of that, and I can link to that in the description below. Okay, it definitely has more warmth and sub-bass presence than the S1. It's not quite as sub-bass rumbly as the 6XX, I think, okay, but it's not far behind. So it is definitely warmer than the S1. That's a reasonably accurate statement. Frequency response and presentation-wise, it comes across as a hybrid of the Sen HD650/6XX and the Sen HD600. And what I mean by that is it has, it leans a little bit neutral warm in the way that the 6XX does, but doesn't go quite that far. And then it has the slightly more open staging and a little bit less mid-bass congestion initially, at least in the presentation, like that the HD600 has. Okay, so it kind of lands in the space between those two, again, from a frequency response and a presentation standpoint. Now, I think the sound staging on the S2 is a little bit bigger yet than the 600. I can't speak directly to the precision of the imaging or the separation compared to the 600 because I don't have that one in currently to do direct A/B with. It is a little bit sharper imager and spatial separator than the 6XX is, being just a little bit less 3 blobby in its spatial presentation. Okay, so it may very well be the biggest sound stager and maybe the best imager and separator of the Sen HD600 series. Okay, but I can't confirm that without having the 600 with me because I think it would be between the 600 and this one for at least the imaging and separation bit. I'm pretty sure this one is staging a little bit bigger than the 600 does, at least from memory. All right, let's talk resolution for a moment here. The resolution of the Sen 600 series is a bit of a mixed bag. They are very revealing and resolving of source gear and what's in the material, what's in the music, through the mid-range. And I think that is largely still true here to an extent. The 650, 6XX, 600 have just that really organic, natural sounding mid-range to them. With the 650, 6XX injecting a little bit of added warmth to it, the 600 being more of a picture of neutrality through there, but they're both, all of those are still just really organic and natural sounding through the mids, and part of that is because of how resolving they are in the mids. Now, I don't think the tonal balance through the mid-range, the entire picture of or spectrum of the mid-range here on the S2 is quite as strong as either of the 600 or the 650/6XX. Okay, and that has a couple of outcomes to it. One is that it will initially present as a little bit more resolving, particularly in kind of the lower mid-range where you will start to hear the overtones and the finger actions of an electric bass guitar. Okay, I did a test track short recently of the track Hero of the Day by Metallica, and I mentioned that in that track, Jason Newsted's bass playing sounds boingy. Okay, and it's just the way that he's playing it, and there's the overtones and the upper frequencies that an electric bass guitar can produce when it's played quickly comes through a lot on that track, and it comes through even more clearly on the S2 than it does the 6XX, you know, and that sort of thing too. Upon close listening, I don't think it's any more resolving than the 6XX. It just, because of the tonal balance being just a little bit different, that range just stands out a little bit more and is a little bit more prominent. So, and that happens in a couple other places too. Like in the treble, there's just a little bit more sharpness and peakiness to the tonal balance here on the S2 as compared to the 6XX anyway. And so that initially gives it just a little bit more bite, which can come across as a little bit more clarity initially, but as you listen, I don't hear anything that this is resolving that this one isn't. Okay, it's just pushed a little bit more forward in the mix there. So I am going to refrain from saying that this is in any way a step forward in overall resolution from the 600 series. It also, I think, messes with the tonal balance that the magic that the 600 and the 650/6XX caught in terms of their tonality and their timbre is just not quite here, in my opinion. Now, this is not bad. It just doesn't sound as natural or organic, particularly through the mids, but also a little bit in the treble, as either of its sibling models there. All right, and to the point where I did find the 660S2 to be fatiguing, especially through the upper mids. It just sounds a little bit more hollow and sometimes a bit more shouty to me. And it doesn't chill out some of the mid-range frequencies in the way that the 6XX does. Like, for example, the band Mastodon. I love their stuff musically most of the time. You know, they are a heavy metal band, so their music is already naturally aggressive, right? But their recording and their mastering is also like abrasive, right? So it's not just that the music is intense and unsettling because it's heavy metal and all, and then, you know, the feeling and the sound that comes with heavy metal is just, their recording techniques are just not great and just come across as abrasive sometimes. To the point where I call them an HD6XX band because the HD6XX can chill some of that out while still pulling out most of what the signal has to offer and be less fatiguing. I was not getting that sense here with the 660S2, like where the music was still forward and aggressive and, like I just said, abrasive. This like brought that through as well. So is that a good or a bad trait? I guess depends on what you're after. Is that more resolving and true to the source material? Maybe, but I did find it more fatiguing than I did the 6XX. And so there are some recordings where that just doesn't work quite as well. Okay, I've done a fair number of comparisons with the 6XX here and the HD600 already, just kind of woven all the way through the review here. Let's take a look at a couple of other market competitors. There's still the Beyerdynamic DT880 out there. This is the 600 ohm variant that I have cable modded to dual entry detachable cables. This is still a $200 headphone. I think it stages bigger and images more accurately still than any of the Sennhs, the 660S2 included. Okay. And it also is capable of better treble timbre, although you have to be very careful and scale up a bit in signal chain quality to bring that out. Okay, but that's there. It also just has better frequency extension in both directions. It will reach a little bit deeper in the sub-bass. Not going to have a whole lot of presence and rumble down there, but it will reach deeper than the 660S2. And then it's going to extend up higher in the treble as well. okay, and that sort of thing. I still think that most of the market under $500, like this is still one of the best, if not the best, sound stagers and imaging separation, laterally at least, okay, in that price range. Is just really good with the right source gear. The 660S2 has not caught up to it, okay, in that regard. The 660S2, though, might still have just a little bit more warmer overall tonality to it, which some people will appreciate. One of the things that helped me figure out the value, or maybe lack thereof, of the 660S2 is the Hi-Fi Man Edition XS right here, which is $500 USD. The 660S2 has a physical comfort and a build quality advantage over the 660S2. Like this one just feels a little bit cheaper and chintzier in its build, whereas this one feels like it'll last 20 years. This one, you know, maybe 5, maybe 10, okay? So there is that. Now sonically, much bigger soundstage here, much more accurate imaging and separation, much better frequency extension in both directions, more sub-bass slam. Okay, the treble might be just a little bit peakier, so a little bit sharper treble on this one, which I would say is an advantage of 660S2. But honestly, that's one of the very few sonic advantages that I find the 660S2 has over the Edition XS. Okay, because everything else, like the resolution here, is noticeably superior to the 660S2. And where does that show up? I said that this one is brighter and a bit peakier in the treble, and someone is probably already thinking, well, you're not hearing an increase in detail retrieval, you're hearing a treble peak. Let's talk about mid-range then, shall we? Because the separation of vocals is better on the XS. I'm maybe not quite as natural in the timbre as the 660S2, but not far behind, very close to. But the vocal separation, so that vocal parts, vocal harmonies are standing out and are distinct from each other, is better here. Reverbs, okay, like room reverbs here are more distinct through the Edition XS than they are through the 660S2. A track that really showed this off is Lady in Black by Uriah Heep. Okay, that track just has a ton of room reverb going on it. And then there's also a harmony vocal track that is very soft in the mix in terms of level and tucked down in the left channel. That is right on time with the vocal lead. So the vocal lead is here in the center. Okay, then that secondary harmony vocal track is like here in the left. Then most of the mid-range reverb, both vocal and like drum sounds, there's a lot of drum reverb, like reflections off a back wall kind of thing happening in this mix, is just right of center, which is left from your vantage point, but just right of center. Those reflections stood out and were a little bit more distinct and therefore more natural to my ear than what the 660S was doing. Meaning, there was a noticeable little brief period of time between the initial sound of the vocal lead and the initial drum hit, and then the reflection off the back wall of those things in the mix. Just a little bit of a time gap in there, where the 660S2 kind of blended them together more, and it just like kind of just bled right from one into the other. Wasn't distinct in there. Then where that reflection was coming from, spatially, for the 660S2, it was a little bit right of center, but it kind of bled more into the right too. So it was just a little bit more like amorphous, okay, and diffuse, okay, here in the right center. Whereas like there was a noticeable coming from here kind of sensation with the Edition XS, where there was this like main reflection point, and then to either side of that main reflection point, you could hear like the spatial trail off in either direction coming from the Edition XS that you did not hear from the 660S2. So there are going to be some people who like the 660S2, just prefer its presentation over the Edition XS because of tuning reasons, because it matches their preferred style of music. They might find the treble on this one a little bit more fatiguing, and I get all of that, but in terms of overall sonic package, the Edition XS is the much more sonically technical and capable headphone for $100 less than the S2. Okay, so the sonic package here on the 660S2, I kind of agree with the consensus of the reviewing community here. It's not bad. It's good. It's enjoyable and listenable with a fairly wide range of music, but not as wide a range as its sibling models are. Okay, but it doesn't really bring anything new or above and beyond what is already present in the 600 series. Like I said, it's kind of a mix of the 650/6XX presentation and the 600 presentation, resting kind of in the middle, but to my ear doesn't really capture the magic of either of those two. Okay, and it's just on the overall technical package, when you think about staging, resolution, timbre, okay, dynamics, like all of those things, good, but not stand out better than its sibling model. So it's just another flavor of HD600 series headphone, which again isn't bad, but it's $600, right? And you can pick up a 600 not for a non-sale price now of about $400. I think that's overpriced because the 6XX, even though its price is creeping up to like $240, $260, $280, something like that now, like to me, that price, somewhere between $250 and $300, sets the standard for what the 600 series should sell for. $600 is definitely not it. Okay? So to me, S2 from 660S2 does indeed stand for strike 2, because the S1 was kind of strike 1. It's not a strike in terms of a swing and a miss. It's a strike in terms of a foul ball, I think. Now, a lot of people out there may not be familiar with baseball enough to understand that analogy, so let me unpack that a little bit. In the sport of baseball, okay, if the batter swings at the ball and misses, that's a strike. Okay, but if they swing at the ball and they make contact with the ball, but the ball does not end up in play, okay, it just gets tipped, it gets knocked up, goes back behind them, it stays outside of the bounds of play, okay, it's called a foul ball. Foul balls count as a strike up to strike 3. You cannot strike out, okay, 3 strikes, you're out, you're probably familiar with that. You cannot strike out on a foul ball. You can get strike 1 on a foul ball, you can get strike 2 on a foul ball, but you're not going to foul out. You can keep fouling off pitches until you get a pitch that you like. So I say that here to say that I don't find the S2 here to be a complete swing and a miss. But it's also like they made contact with the ball, but it just didn't end up really doing much of anything, right? And at $600, that to me is a bit inexcusable, particularly when it's the second shot at the 660 line, right? So I think Sennheiser to me is showing a little bit of lack of market awareness in terms of the price to performance ratio that they are putting out there with this 660 series. Get these to $400 or less. Even $400 is probably a bit much, because I still think the 600 at $400 here in the year 2023 is too much. Okay, get it to $300. Now we're talking. Now we have a case to be made for, yeah, it's a little bit of a combination of the 650 and the 600. It's a little bit different flavor of the Sen 600 series. It'll work for some, it won't work for others, but that's okay. We can make those choices. But that to me tells me that it's about twice the price that it should be, which just comes back to me saying that like Sennheiser has demonstrated a bit of lack of market awareness now here for the second time on this model run, this model series. And I don't know why that is. That's a bit fishy to me. So Sennheiser, please get it together on that. Don't set these things at $600 right out of the gate. If you want to make a $600 headphone, do something that is truly different and technically competes with the rest of the market context out there, because frankly, they have caught you. Okay. You know, the rest of the market has caught you. Like you still have the wonderful mid-range naturalness and timbre and all that of the 600 and the 650. Those are still standout features, but in terms of resolution, staging, dynamics, okay, and other aspects of presentation, you have been caught, if not outright surpassed, by a much of the competing market. And so this to me, at this price, feels like you don't yet realize that. Okay, so I think you need to get it together on that one. All right, I'll go ahead and wrap it up there. I am Wave Theory. This has been my review of the Sennheiser HD660S2. Feel free to comment down below whether you thought this was a positive or negative review, or if you think that my strike 2 as a foul ball analogy is fair or not. And then, yeah, remember to subscribe to the channel, like if you haven't already, and do those things that you do to support YouTube channels, like check out my Patreon and my PayPal, links in the description. But as always, thanks for watching and enjoy the music.